Aha! Thank goodness, somebody there. Karen and M, whoever M is. I'm sorry, I'm laughing almost hysterically. It's what a screw up. And several minutes of extreme anxiety there till I throw it all together again. So even if you're the only few that show up, please take my thank you for being there. Thank you, Karen. That's sweet of you. Yes, all will be okay. Because with the wonders of modern technology, most of the people who see my Sunday meeting do it on Monday through Friday. They watch the videos, of course, the recording, and that's fine. That's the way we'd like it. Hi, Meg. I mean, I'm very glad that I've got a very sensible, very alert, intelligent bunch that noticed that A, there was a screw up, B, that I'd emailed a solution and it can all happen anyway. That's rather good. So, as I said, thank you. Just give me a few minutes, well, 2 or 3 minutes to the top of the hour. I've done all my housekeeping, so I know, you know, sound, vision, and all these things are good. Okay, let me take a look in chat as well. Oh, that's kind of a very sweet note, yes. Yeah. So welcome as you come on. And as I said, thank you so much for being intelligent. Say something, Meg. Hang on, I've got to ask you to unmute. Oh, no.
Hi there. I wondered if today,
for some bizarre reason, I'm not getting the sound into my headset. Despite the fact that I just set it up that way. Gosh, give me a moment. Isn't technology so subversive? Right, I can hear. Okay, say it again, Meg, please.
I wanted to know whether, as part of this discussion today, Keith, we are going to talk about flower essences and all of what they can do, especially the beige ones.
Yeah, well, I mean, the answer was I hadn't thought of it or hadn't planned that. We were thinking more maybe consciousness. But listen, when you know we get partway through, why don't you bring that up and just give us your basic view? I mean, I'm very fond of the Batch remedies. There are others, as you know, but I don't trust them nearly so much as Richard Batch. Sorry, Edward Batch. Richard Batch was a writer, wasn't he? Wrote Jonathan Livingston.
Yeah, I'd like us to talk about it. I'd like us to talk about it because I think a lot of people don't know about them, and this is a perfect opportunity to bring them up. I think this is a time for self-healing, and this is a very safe, long-used method that people can pay attention to and self-administer.
Yes. Yes, well, I don't argue with the value of them, but I did have some different points in mind. So I do want the opportunity to say my points. But I repeat, I want you to come back later and talk about this.
That's fine.
We know that, well, we're going to talk about the very thing, you know, plants are intelligent, wise, but it's not that they're over there and they're intelligent, we're over here, we're intelligent. We're all interconnected in this massive phenomenon called Pan-Psychism. You know, the universal consciousness ties us into all forms in some. So whatever a plant in a hedgerow somewhere that's been eaten by a cow, say, is feeling, it's part of our environment. And I'm going to bring up a very, very graphic example of that as we go along. People often say, you know, how amazing plants are and hushed, reverent tones of what they can do, but actually they're coupled with those, and some of it reflects on us too. It's how amazing we are that we, hi Blaze, and Don is here, so Elaine will be with us. I'm glad you all blundered, well, found your way through my blundering, I should say, that you were smart enough to get it sorted. I was just talking with friend Meg, and she wants to talk about flower remedies, which I think is very much to the point. So maybe she'll come back and talk about that later on. I do flower remedies, so, you know, I'm consider myself knowledgeable, shall we say, not the same as an expert. But in fact, I just realized I left a sentence hanging up in the air, but Edward Batch had a really remarkable consciousness, sensitivity, and intelligence. And he you know, he was a sensitive, or whatever you want to call him. He could touch a flower leaf and he'd feel something psychically about the plant, not just a kind of feeling for himself, but a healing modality. And he collected these. He collected dew and samples, and then homeopathically potentized them, and you know, turned into some remarkable remedies, basically. Since then, it's gone on like other people. There's an Australian group, I've forgotten what they call themselves. They have a whole different range of flower remedies. But of course, the other thing to say, Meg, is we're not confining ourselves to flowers. It's just plants. Yeah, are we okay with that? Let me get that thing out of the way now. In fact, I'm going to start you off with this question. How many of you actually think that plants are conscious? Yeah? Well, I've got to tell you, this one isn't. It's made of plastic. Haha. And that was going to be my joke, but you know, the joke's on me, because I went to dig this plant out, this thing out of the office windowsill, and out leapt a pair of spectacles, which I lost ages ago, and I was really upset about. These are my best sort of glamorous glasses, as it were. The least evident, least pronounced, I should say. And we're leaving for Europe in a couple of days. So I was really peed off. I couldn't find these things. So I dreamt up this silly joke. Oh, well, I'll wave a plastic plant. And when I was demonstrating it to the, whoop, out leapt a pair of spectacles. So maybe the plastic plant is smarter than I think it is. Maybe it was hanging on to it, being secretive, and then threw it out when I finally honored it. Possible. Not very likely, I suppose, but it's possible. Anyway, we're going to talk about plant consciousness. And it is in the sort of reverential or sacred sense, you know. Plants are wonderful. I'm a gardener. I love doing what I do. No, you know, that's a yes, a big yes. But there's something about the awareness of plants that tells us something much greater about how we came into being and what being really means. And in fact, what consciousness really means. You'll hear me saying, I think, many times over the years that consciousness is just a given. You know, it just is. If consciousness came first, it means it was there before matter, energy, space, and time. There was no brain, there was no animal forms or plant forms or any forms. There was just consciousness. I call that primal consciousness. And to me, that equates roughly with what some people might think of when they use the word God, but they think of a person. I don't think this primal consciousness is a person, an entity, or a being. It's a state. If you know Anita Moorjani's work, the lady that survived cancer and wrote a beautiful book called Dying to Be Me, Anita Moorjani, she had a near-death experience, went to the other side, and when she came back, she was very firm that God is very clear, but God is a state, a being. It's not a person. Anyway, I don't want to go any further in case I stamp on anybody's toes, but look, I've got a couple of books to suggest to you. This is a very, very important book, actually. It's called The Secret Life of Plants. I know the cover's a bit rough now. It's by Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird, and it's full of wonderful stories. I'm not going to rely heavily on their stories today. I've got a different track, as it were, a different thread. But I'll give you an example. Some of you, maybe all of you even, know about Dorothy Retalic and her experiments on plants and music. And she laid out vines to listen, you know, had loudspeakers, and to listen to music. In a nutshell, the plants loved the music of Bach and Beethoven and Mozart, and they went and twined themselves around the loudspeakers and seemed to be going, yummy, yummy, give us more. And then she tried playing hard rock to them, and they all shriveled up and near died. They became super dehydrated. She had trouble reviving the plants, because that's what hard rock and heavy metal did to plants. So what does it do to human beings? The answer is the same thing, basically. It's not a healthy kind of music. So we could take some of our cues from plants, you know. Let's play music to plants, and if they thrive on it, then it's good for humans. And if they don't thrive or shrivel, we should label this music as a health hazard. And I'm not even kidding. I don't see how it could happen, but I'm certainly not kidding. The other book I want to talk to you, well, mention is my own Medicine Beyond. There's a whole section about plant consciousness and physiology in there. And in fact, I'll probably read you a couple of paragraphs as we go along. But now, if it's okay with you guys, well, in fact, tell you what, let me try and do there's a poll here. Let me try and do a poll before we start. I'm going to launch the poll and you click on it. The question is clear. Do you talk to plants on a regular basis, or do you talk to them at all? You know, straightforward, yes or no. Everybody can vote, and it's all anonymous. I'm not going to find out who's the fairy that talks to plants. I talk to plants. Gosh, plants don't grow well unless you interact with them. So yeah, well, I mean, it's overwhelming. A couple of guys don't, but the vast majority, well, actually, no, it's dropped again. So I don't know if we're finished voting, but anyway, it dropped back from 83% to 75%. Still, I think it's fair to describe it as the majority of people on this call are very comfortable with the idea of talking to plants. Hey, you wouldn't talk to plants unless you really believe they could hear you, would you? So, I mean, you're voting in a way that you believe in plant consciousness, and it makes sense. So I'm really pleased that that is the position of the majority. I'm going to end the poll, so you probably lose sight of it. What do I do? No, relaunch. Wait a minute. Oh, there we go, to close it. Okay, sorry.
Keith, what was the name of the lady who did the experiment with the music?
Right, she's called Dorothy Retalic, and I'm going to have to look up the spelling of her name. The harmonic, I think it'd be that one, 135. Just to get the spelling, you'll find Retalic in almost any spelling will come up.
Okay,
Here we go. Here we go. Dorothy Retalic. So it's Retalallack. She did these famous experiments in the 1960s, 1968. And it's wonderful the work that she did and the results that she got. And of course, lots of people try to rubbish her work, but it's been replicated endlessly. And that's the key to science. People can replicate it. They do the same experiment, they find the same results. Maggie, if it's okay, I'm gonna mute you. Well, actually, yeah, there we go. Because there's not because I don't like to listen to you, Maggie, but because there was a hissing noise coming through. Okay, so let's, like I said, I had a sort of different view in mind than the Megs. She wanted to talk about plant remedies, and we will. But I want to take a scientific look at it. If I'm known for anything, friends, it's that I don't just have opinions. I'm very opinionated, but I don't just have opinions. I've got reasons to think that. I've got science. I've got backing for my ideas. We can take this back as far as Descartes. We could go back to biblical times and beyond, I'm sure, into the deep depths of prehistory. But Descartes was pretty clear in his mind that plants and animals, they were just rubbish. They didn't feel anything. They didn't have any emotions. They were just automatons responding to the environment. Of course, we now know he's totally wrong. So he was extremely clever. He invented a brilliant form of Cartesian mathematics, I'm sure you've heard about. And he famously said, cogito ergo sum, which is Latin for I think, therefore I am. It's that man, René Descartes, the French guy. But I'd rather turn to a much more interesting person in the early 20th century, a man called Jagadish Chandra Bose. He was an Indian. Meaning, the continent of India, and therefore, invested in the British Empire somewhat. And eventually he became knighted, in fact. So he was one of very few dark-skinned Indian people to become a sir. I mean, the only surefire way of getting there was to be a good cricketer. You ended up a sir somebody or other if you were a good cricketer. But anyway, Jagadish was simply a visionary philosopher, scientist. He actually invented wireless transmissions before Marconi, but because he was some colored person in some other continent that nobody cared about, he's never been given priority. But he also studied early microwaves, millimeter microwaves. I'm only throwing these terms out, but basically that's what we use for our cell phones today. And he was doing that right back at the turn of the century. But anyway, his investigations, many and varied, one of which was into plant reactivity. And he would wire up, well, wire up's the wrong word, but he would connect plants to strings through pulleys and levers that multiplied the movement many times. Very clever, actually. I mean, now we do it all electronically, obviously. But he found that, you know, when the plants were rigged up in a certain way, if you touched a leaf, the plant would go like that and would react. And that sort of withdrawing movement was magnified to being a huge visible arc because of the clever multiplication of pulleys and things. Very clever. That machine was called a crescograph. And if you ever want to research this man, I promise you hours of really fascinating reading on the internet. I should, I suppose, mention Charles Darwin. He had a thing about plants and plant consciousness, by the way. You know, he's the person that's blamed the most for the sort of mechanistic view of life. You know, it's all just cold accidents and robots and randomness working out. There's no intelligence. Darwin didn't say that at all, actually. He's been usurped by the modern reductionists to claim that evolution, if there is such a thing, is just pure luck, pure chance, things happening randomly, and some work out and some don't, and that's called survival of the fittest. It's almost wall-to-wall bullshit, but the people still keep saying it. There are, despite the fact it doesn't happen, you know, there is no fossil evidence for evolution, none whatsoever. You don't have this animal, its neck's a bit longer, its neck's a bit longer still, its neck's longer still, and wham, you've got a giraffe. Doesn't happen. There's no intermediate forms, just bang, suddenly you have a giraffe with an 8-foot neck. So they've had to come up with some other theory. They call it punctuated equilibrium, and it's just as good a way, it's a fancy word, but just as good a way of saying evolution isn't true. Quite apart from the fact there's nowhere near enough time for this sort of random nonsense to happen. But anyway, believe it or not, modern research is really backing up. Oh, Charles Darwin had this idea about what he called a root brain in plants. In fact, he wrote a book on the movement of plants, the power of movement in plants. He didn't say consciousness, but he did say power of movement. And he said that plants have a kind of proto-brain stuck in their roots, because it's the root, you know, that has to make intelligent choices. You know, if we go this way, there's water. If we go that way, we're going to starve. So in a way, plant roots are very clever. And in 2009, there was a paper published. You probably don't need all the people's names. Dieter Volkmann was the main scientist, but he had a bunch of colleagues with him. Plant signal behavior. There's a journal called that, believe it or not. And they wrote a paper basically examining Darwin's hypothesis of root intelligence and saying, what do you know? It's true. He was quite correct. So, you know, once we get to understanding that plants are at least sensate means they can sense things, they can be aware, but whether their consciousness depends on things like decision making. And it seems very clear that plants do, but because they're so slow, nobody gave them credit for it. But if you see speeded up footage, you will, there's a plant called a dodder, for example, which is a kind of parasitic, you know, invasive thing like ivy. But if you see speeded up footage, and you can find it on YouTube, of the dodder, very simple spelling, if you want to look it up, D-O-D-D-E-R, dodder. And it comes up, sniffs around, and off it goes and finds a victim and wraps itself around it and starts to parasitize it. It's just happening so slow, we don't recognize that. But as soon as you see it speed up, there can be almost no doubt this plant's intelligent, you know, and right, that's the way we're going. Very, you know, very fascinating stuff. Now, as I said, this has bigger implications for us, for consciousness, for life, for living things. Let me quote Michael Winkelmann, who's the Associate Professor of Biology at Arizona State University. And he said, and I'm quoting him now, the self-identifications with the broader universe, particularly personification of the sentient cosmos, which he said, and this is his quote, he says is the hallmark of eco-psychology, is a fundamental aspect of shamanism. I'm going to change the word eco-psychology to Pan-Psychism. I don't know if you've heard this word, but it means everything's alive. Everything's conscious. Electrons are conscious. Water molecules are conscious. Stars are conscious. Galaxies are conscious. The planet's conscious. Everything is conscious. And that fits into the great sort of spiritual, semi-religious model I mentioned, just a little while ago, that if consciousness came first, everything is in consciousness. So it imbues all of the physical structures, matter, energy, space, time, all those things are within consciousness. Stupid modern science says, oh no, consciousness is just a lucky accident that took place in a bunch of molecules, millions of years ago. We don't know when, but it's called an epiphenomenon, meaning it's just an accident on top of all the clanking and machinations of the great driven machine that's going on. But then again, I'm sure you remember the famous quote by Sir James Jeans that the physical universe is beginning to look more and more like a great thought instead of a great machine. Anyway, I want to share an experiment. I hope you're listening, Elaine, because this is one for you. I can see Don's name is up there, but you said you might try and make it. We were talking about names of people who had done psychogalvanometry on plants, and of course Cleve Baxter. I've got a nice picture of Cleve and myself standing right next to the plant in which he did his famous experiments. But let me tell you another person called Paul Severan. And in fact, it's sorry, I was going to say it's in Medicine Beyond. No, it's not, but it's in some of my other writings. Anyway, never mind, I'll just do it verbally. Paul Severan was a scientific, philosophical engineer type person. Long story short, he wired up some plants in the laboratory and he was testing what Cleve Baxter had found. If you startle them or frighten them, the plants go, ooh, and they get all emotional, untogether, as the hippies used to say. Anyway, by chance, he observed the following, which is that when he and his girlfriend of the day were out in the forest 80 miles away in a cabin, when they had sex, the plants back in the laboratory at that exact same second went ooh in the laboratory. They could feel his and her emotional excitement, the intensity of a moment of sexual orgasm and fulfillment. The plants knew. Now, I used to joke, of course, he had to test this over and over, so he did it hundreds of times to see if it was true. That was just a joke. But, he was very satisfied with the repeats, that he was getting a definite phenomenon, that the plants could know what a human was experiencing 80 miles away. Now, a lot of people say, oh, aren't plants marvelous? They're so wonderful. But look, it teaches you something about humans. Aren't we marvelous? That what our thoughts and ideas and emotions are at least 160 miles across, if you think about it, right? 80 miles that way and 80 miles that way. So at least 160 miles across. I mean, if you don't, non-locality says that probably goes to the end of the universe. And that's probably true. That's what the sort of non-locality property tells us, basically. All right, moving on. Let me quote a man called Stephen Harrod Butner. I don't know if you know this. Butner, I should say, not Butner. And I'm just going to quote him because this is rather lovely. He says, all people, and I mean all, know that the earth and everything in it is alive. 4-year-old children naturally know this. They have to be forcefully taught that the world is dead. Ancient and indigenous cultures never killed that sensibility, but rather developed it. It was interwoven into the web of life on the planet, not separate from it. But it was not just indigenous cultures, of course. All ancient cultures knew this, no matter how they developed. I mean, it's implicit in the ancient Vedic cultures, the Egyptians, the Middle Eastern. It's intelligent there. We all sort of know it. The only people that don't get it are scientists, and not even all scientists, just the dyed-in-the-wool old farts that have been telling the old story, the Big Bang, the mechanical accidents, all random, there's no thought, there's no creativity, life, or awareness in it, it's just a giant machine. Those scientists, well, I've got to tell you, they're dying out. And there's a younger generation coming up that are much smarter, and they do understand what it is that I want to share. Let me take Monica Galliano, for example. She's associate professor, I don't know what I've actually come to think of it, biology, I suppose, almost certainly. Anyway, in Western Australia, University in Western Australia. And in 2014, she conducted a series of experiments using a plant called Mimosa Poodika. Now, you can go online and see videos of this plant being used as a sort of test of consciousness and awareness. Pudica is Latin for prudish, you know, kind of shy. And this plant, it looks lovely until you frighten it. It just goes like that. Literally, in a split second, it drops all its leaves. I don't mean they fall off, I mean they just collapse. So it's a great thing. It's really fun to watch experiments with it, because you can get a Mimosa Poodika touching another plant, and you go and tickle the leaf on the other plant, and the mimosa still goes. Anyway, Professor Galliano did experiments with the plant where she would frighten them by dropping them. About 6 inches, she'd just drop them onto a soft surface, bang, and the plants would do their thing. And she'd do it again, and plants would do their thing. After about 6 goes, the plants thought, this is not, doesn't seem to be a problem. So they stopped reacting. Well, of course, all her critics, they had all, smart asses. Well, of course, it's just the plants are being exhausted. They've given up after a while because they got no more left in them. Well, she proved them wrong by exhausting the plants first and then conducting the experiment. And sure, she had them shaken up and down in the machine until they just hadn't got any more energy left in them. But then when she put them out and dropped them, exactly the same reaction. But they learned again, after 6 goes, they learned. I mean, this kind of stuff, it's scriptural. You can't make it up that plants can do these things. I mean, we all know, Venus flytrap and things, they can sense a fly. But this is much more subtle. This is learning and memory things. And in fact, I told the story in this book, there was a whole science, as it were, developed. In 2005, they founded the Society for Plant Neurobiology. Oh my goodness, that sent shockwaves through the real scientists, of course. Who are these fairies talking about plant neurobiology? We know plants don't have a neurological system. They got no brains. It's all baloney. And believe it or not, they won. They forced a change of name to the Society for Plant Signaling and Behavior. It's about as boring as it gets. But anyway, at least they do recognize that plants can signal and they do behave. They respond to things in a manner which really you can't argue is anything but intelligent, responsive behavior. If you doubt that, let me tell you something shockingly amazing. A lady called Susan Murch. Now, she works at the University of British Columbia in Kelowna, which is in Western Canada. And she showed that drugs like Prozac, Ritalin, and methamphetamines, which disrupt neurotransmitters in humans, we know that, does the same thing in plants. Can you believe that? If you really mess with a plant's ability to transport things like melatonin, serotonin, other signaling chemicals, the plant's growth and behavior and development becomes really weird. The plant goes kind of loopy or cuckoo, if you like, malformed, disjointed root growths and things. Don't you think that's stunning, that Prozac has an effect on plants? I couldn't believe it when I read it, actually. I thought it was really staggering. Anyway, I was going to share something with you about that from, my book. If you haven't got this, you should. It's a brilliant book, if I say myself. Anyway, I just told you that bit, haven't I, about the Society of Plant Signaling and Behavior. Oh yes, I knew I needed a reminder. In here, also, I've written about the singing trees of Damanhur. Now, have you heard of this? First of all, let me tell you what Damanhur is, a 2 or 3 sentence orientation. It's in northern Italy. It's an eco community. People live on site and try and live the ideal life and meditation. Viv and I were there 4 or 5 years ago, and I've got to tell you, it's very weird, weird people. But they're doing some amazing things. And one of the things that they did was to wire up plants, trees in particular, to a kind of MIDI synthesizer. And lo and behold, the trees would start singing, and quite beautiful. They would create beautiful music. Now, it's not that, you know, it's not implicit in the electronic device, the synthesizer. It just responds to changes in voltages and, you know, currents and things. It translates that into sound. But the plants actually can learn, and I have a similar device here at the house. Like I said, I haven't got time to wire it up this time, but we'll probably, I mean, if you want to search, I certainly set up a video there, but the easiest one to find, honestly, would be the singing trees of Damanhur. I'll spell it in a minute. If you type that in YouTube, you'll be taken straight to it, because it's, you know, one of those huge, mega, hundreds of millions of views. Damanhur is D-A-M-A-N-H-U-R. Damanhur, the singing trees of Damanhur. And I mean, it is really quite spiritual to think of the implication of what's happening. Like I said, I've got one, and Viv and I, we're just in awe of the plants when they do this. First of all, you can see them learning. You know, it sort of goes beep, bop, beep, beep, bop, all kinds of weird stuff. But within an hour, 2 hours at the most, the plant's singing away, tinkly, tinkly, ding, ding. If the plant can't hear the output, then nothing happens, right? The plant has to hear the results of its change of voltages. And if it likes what it hears, it will replicate it and do it again. And if it's really nice, it'll do it again and again and again. So you get patterns. And I discovered, I don't know if I even dare say it. Anyway, I'll modify it. I discovered that plants don't like bad language, because we had a singing tree in a neighbor's garden. I'm not going to share the words, but let me just say I used a cussing word, and the plant stopped singing instantly. It took about 15 minutes for me to encourage it, you know, to apologize and say, oh, please, and got it back to singing again. And I thought, that's probably maybe just a coincidence. So I swore again, bang, the plant stopped instantly, and we couldn't get it to start singing again that day. Viv will, you know, back me up in that. She was there, of course. And these are friends of ours in northern Nevada, in Reno, in fact. The only other thing to mention from this is psychogalvanometry of plants. Now, I don't know if you know about galvanic skin response meters. You know, you put electrodes on your fingers, or you hold electrodes, and a person's emotional status will produce different signaling or different electronic readings. I've done a whole chapter on that in this book, and it's particularly important for humans. It goes back to a Russian guy called Tarchanov. It actually goes back a bit before him. The first person that took it very seriously was Jung, Carl Jung, you know, the psychologist guy. But he could see that, you know, a reading or a transformation of a person's galvanic skin response, in other words, an alteration of skin resistance, would signal emotional hurt or challenges or stress. Anyway, let's just say emotional stress. The only thing was, it was way before valves and transistors where you could magnify the effect. You know, the old days of, you probably don't remember, but I remember valve radios, you know, big glass things like a bulb, but they're simply to amplify the sound so that you've got a measurable, and you could tune the sound of the radio, and it would be, you know, reasonably audible across the room. Without that, you just had to have what were called crystal radio sets. You had a little crystal which did, you know, pick up and transmit sounds, but it had to go straight into headphones because you couldn't amplify it. But from mid-20s, well, you know, about 1920s, 1930s, amplifying valves came along, and then of course in the 60s we got transistors and transformers. Sorry, yes, I meant to say transistors, not transformers. So now we can magnify all these things. Well, you probably wouldn't now be surprised to find that we can actually do the same thing with plants. You can clip to a leaf in a plant and observe its reactions to its environment. That's a little bit different from the singing, but in principle, well, I did tell you, if the plant can't hear the sound it's producing, it won't sing. It's got to be able to hear it so it can react to it. But this is the work that Cleve Baxter famously did back in about 1968, I think he first published, where he had a plant, a dragon plant, it's called a Dracena. As I said, I've got a lovely picture of me standing with Cleve right next to the actual plant. But he would, well, I don't think we need to go into the whole story and all the accidents, but long story short, he found the plants would react. If you tore a leaf off, the plant would go, ah, on the electrical meter. No, ah, it was like a scream. That was interesting. But what was much more interesting was that the plants could recognize the person who did it. Every time the person who hurt them came into the room, the plants would go, and they'd have a strong electronic emotional reaction. That was really pretty sensational. And I think, you know, in a way, it's QED. Stop talking, because that proves everything I wanted to prove anyway. But he took that further. He found that plants would react to hurt on other life forms. For example, they'd take a certain species of shrimp, I can't remember its name, but in another room at the far end of the laboratory, they would suddenly, they'd have a random trigger that would just tip the whole lot into boiling water and cook the shrimps, at which point the plant would go, you know, it was really upset by the death of all these, you know, dozens and dozens of shrimps at once. I forgot the name, the type of shrimp, but anyway, it's a remarkable experiment, isn't it? And of course, Cleve Baxter, his career was as a police lie detector specialist, you know, polygraph they call it, don't they? Polygraph. He taught polygraph to the FBI and to police. That was his career. So it was no wonder that he got on to tinkering about with plants and thinking, well, I wonder if it applies to plants, and it certainly does. But he published all these famous behaviors. When, by the way, when Viv and I went to see him, we walked in the room and there was an orange wired up on the shelf on the left. And as soon as we walked in, the orange went woo on the needle like that. And we had to look at it, and we were forced to acknowledge it to calm it down. You know, plants are conscious and react, trust me. But Cleve Baxter went on a little bit and studied humans and found certain very fascinating things. If he took scrapings from the inside of somebody's mouth and kept those cells in the laboratory and had them wired up in a saline solution so that you could do some psychogalvanometry, as it were, he found the plant would react to the the cells, start again. The cells would react to the emotional condition of the owner of the cells hundreds of miles away. He was in San Diego, and somebody flew off to Phoenix. They had an upset, and at that exact second, the cells back in the laboratory in San Diego reacted very strongly on the meter. You know, plus, you know, blinding, double blind, and cross, you know, randomization, and all these things. It's a given. It's all been done. It's proven, and I don't care really what the idiots say or think. But my purpose, in a way, today was really to call attention to the really enormous spiritual importance of it all to us. That plants are, you know, they're with us. They're on our side, basically. You know, the idea that you can just, they're just things that you can exploit to the limit and do as much as you want. It's just ridiculous. You know, they're, apart from being intelligent and aware, they're part of us. They're part of it, our ecosystem. And it's not just that we cut them and munch them. They're part of an intellectual and spiritual, creative, energetic ecosystem. And you can't get away from that. So just to believe that they're all things or robotic creatures that you can just exploit to the absolute limit is just beyond insane. It's hideous as well. It's ugly and unspiritual, but you know, it's also heading us for a whole lot of trouble, as I'm sure you're smart enough to be aware. You know, we're part of that scenario, so you can't exploit it to death and destruction without it affecting us. I don't know about you guys, I'm guessing, but me and probably all of you are really hurting on a regular basis now when we're feeling the planet being torn up in the way that it is by these sort of greedy, exploitative people. It kind of makes me shudder. Anyway, okay, so I've had my usual rant and it's time to get others. I'm going to have to go back to where we were and see who's left. And I've driven everybody off. No, good, thanks. Okay, so Raju, predictable Raju. He's always smart and intelligent, got great things to say. Off you go, Raju. Talk to us.
Thank you, Dr. Keith. Great to
Good morning.
good day.
Yeah.
I want to pursue this topic about the consciousness of the plants. And the interesting thing I'm finding out, I'm seeing all around in Colorado and places where cannabis is being used as a medicine, is people's endocannabinoid systems are opening up. And there's a certain degree of quality that goes up in sleep, in emotions, and in food. And so people are being helped a lot right now by plants.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's
There's this term, isn't there, plant teachers, that people like to use. You know, they have things to contribute to us, definitely.
yes, there's a word for plant teachers that comes when you use a plant teacher to invoke the spiritual side of yourself. When you invoke it from the inside after taking a plant medicine, it's called entheogen. And entheogen, E-N-T-H-E-O-G-E-N. And
right.
people use entheogens.
Do you want to put that word in the chat for us so other people know what to look up? Oh, Karen, do you mind if I correct your spelling of Damanhur? Here in chat, Damanhur. That's how it's spelled. Yeah. Put your spelling into Raju, if you would, the word you just said. And theogen. Now theo. I'm not familiar with that word, but I can decipher it. Right? It means to bring God into life form, doesn't it? Theo is God. It means Genesis or creation, and to end something is.
The key word is creation from within, or generated from within.
Yeah, well, that would be a translation. But as I said, you can't get away from the fact that the word theo is in there, which is ancient Greek for God, you know, as in theology and theological, and also used as names, isn't it? You know, like Theophilio, which means lover of God, Theophilio, Theophilio.
Yes.
Yeah,
and I'm also reminded that grass, just the grass, outside grass that we have, was the first item. When grass started growing on Earth, that was the key indicator or the key tipping point where the civilization could exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let me take somebody else, Raju. Come back again when you get more to say. And okay, I don't want to bully or pressure people. I especially don't want to bully this man, but I'm thinking that my friend Blaise D'Assisa would definitely have something to say. He's a skilled herbalist, has dealt with plants as herbs and remedies for a long time. So while I leave you to think whether you're relaxed enough, shall we say, Blaise, to come and talk to us, in the meantime, we'll have Meg say something to us. Oh, there he goes. Let's take Blaise first, if we may, Meg. Okay. It's been a while since we had Blaise. Blaise, can you talk to us? Unmute yourself and then talk to us.
There we go.
I can hear you. Yes. Blaise, by the way, is a professor of mathematics, but a wonderfully spiritual person, despite that.
No, because of that, but because I do not see mathematics in a typical way. But anyway, I did attend an herbal class as part of my becoming an acupuncturist with, he was a Cherokee Indian, and his whole teachings based upon everyone has what's called a plant ally. And he would make us go out into the field and try to understand who our plant ally was or what plant was. So mine ended up to be a plant that's considered toxic. It's the poke root. It has those red berries, and there's a lot of medicine in it. Really, it's a anti-cancer thing like that.
Yeah, isn't that in the ESSIAC formula?
Yes, I believe it is.
Yeah.
You have to be very careful with it, but the whole idea is in herbalism, they had this idea long before chemotherapy that you needed a poison to drive out a more toxic poison. And poke would provide this poison that could somehow be processed by the liver to drive out more, I don't know, more deep poisons. So other things we went into were plant consciousness. We did talk about that. And there was a time when I had this experience with, we were talking about plantain root, if anyone's familiar with that, or the thing plantain. And it's mainly used by herbalists to be crushed and put on the skin to bring out boils or what have you. And it's usually regarded as like a liver herb, but I just said, let me do an experiment myself. And I directed my mind to this plantain plant. And I said, what are some of your healing properties? And I did get a message, and it pointed me to a picture of an intestine with holes in it to help patch them up. Oh, wow. And I have found out that that was true.
Yeah, like diverticulitis, we might
possibly, yeah, which I'm kind of dealing with now, but I wouldn't dare go out and pick any of the plantain out in my area. Everything is sprayed. So you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
If I may mention another thing that I was thinking about before I attended this seminar, and that is cloud consciousness. And it's kind of different how, I'm very glad that you mentioned that everything has consciousness, because we expect consciousness to be in a well-defined body. Like even plants still have a well-defined body, and they so-called live and die, but clouds seem to come and go. And where do they end? Where do they begin? In mathematics, of course, they're called a fractal sort of shape, but I distinctly had a cloud, should we say, encounter. And the cloud, I got a message, and it said to me, there's going to be a tornado. And I said, oh my goodness, how do you know that? And I was marveling about this, how the consciousness of this cloud was independent of time. And I was thinking about this when I'm in this parking lot of this grocery store. It's kind of out in the country. And I got another message from the cloud, and it was saying, dummy, the message for you is the tornado is now. So I started heading out. Don't you know, all of a sudden, the tornado where I visualized it was going to be, where I first got this communication, it descended on me. I imagine it was a zero tornado, but it was utterly terrifying. All of a sudden, I was in the middle of this tornado where I was told it would be a half hour later, and it's swirling darkness around me, and luckily the car didn't flip over, and then things were proceeding on from there. But it was interesting and terrifying, but beautiful at the same time. So I just wanted to mention that consciousness is just there, and it doesn't need a well-defined body that we can put a shape on it.
Right. Blaze, that was wonderful. That was very scriptural, if you don't mind me saying so. And I'm so glad you joined us for talking. I mean, I know I've seen you there a number of times, but that you were willing to share. So, you know, speak up again in the future too. You're very articulate, and I like listening to what you have to say. Okay, so let's go on and let's, I'm guessing I know what Meg is going to talk about. She wants to push us in the direction of flower remedies, and I've got no problem with that. I dare say Blaze is familiar with all of these anyway, as well as herbs. So it's not just herbs. Can you unmute yourself, Meg? Can you do that?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, there we go. I got you. Right, okay. So I know you want to share. You're panting to share. Go for it.
Well, once I got familiar with the base, which people will look at it, it's written B-A-C-H, and people think they're called Bach, but the English
It's Welsh, actually. It's Welsh, darling. Bach.
Edward Bache. He was a medical physician who had a Harley Street office, and as you said, was very, very sensitive, and put together 39 different flower essences, one of which is called Rescue Remedy, that you will see in good health food stores in yellow cartons and packaging. And it is a combination of 6 different flower essences. And Rescue Remedy, even though I have the rest of the 38, Rescue Remedy is the one that I have had the most experience with. And I give it total credit for me being able to survive many years of trial and tribulation. It's been very supportive, and I feel like when I read the work of Dr. Dietmar Kramer in Germany and his work with the flower essences, particularly beige, that every part of your body is a zone that holds some memory, and we could say consciousness, that consciousness is not just in the brain, that mind is really more diffuse than that, more diffuse in our body, and maybe, as we're all talking now, more diffuse in the universe. But each section of your body, he worked out which flower essence would help when there was pain or some other issue in any part, that there was a rescue, there was a remedy, a flower remedy that would work to ameliorate it, sometimes in a staged way, depending on how severe the situation had become. That there was, in each case, usually he discovered 3 different levels and then 3 different essences depending on what the intensity of your issue was. Right. But I just want to encourage people to learn more. As Keith said, the Australian Aboriginal heritage is being brought forth in a 7th generation herbalist who I don't know, I believe he was born in Australia, but where the other 6 generations of his family herbalists may have been in England, I don't know. Yeah. But Ian White is that man, and he has worked with the Aboriginal shamans and has put together probably the next most exhaustive array Australian flower essences. After that, as Keith said, you know, you've got a lot of different people putting essences out there. There's California ones, there's Alaskan ones based on Eskimo experience, and a whole bunch that are just very modern, that people didn't base it on anything indigenous, but on their own sensitivity. Yeah. The ones that Beish did have almost 100 years worth of track record. And so that's true now, they're the ones that I recommend. Yeah. I missed what you said, Keith.
No, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just blurted it out saying, my goodness, yes, he was 1920s, so you're right, it's almost 100 years now.
Yes, it's amazing that.
I mean, I discovered them in the 60s and 70s, but they didn't, you know, that seemed a little while ago. All of a sudden, it's 100 years ago. All of a sudden, it's a century.
All of a sudden, it's a century.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of times, those of you who are in the health food stores, you're not going to notice them in the supplement section. You're not going to realize what they are. They may or may not have literature, but I encourage you. One of the American physicians who's working with them, I think her name is Dr. Rosemary Laro, something like that, an Italian name. Mm-hmm. But there are several MDs who are beginning to work, but the NDs, the naturopathic physicians, will understand that they're something worth working with and Keith has worked with them. So I just wanted to alert people to understand that you actually have something that is profound for you to begin to experiment with. And the other thing that I wanted to say, what you were talking about, the person who experimented, who thought the brain of a plant was in the roots.
Well, that was Charles Darwin originally wrote that idea.
I wanted to mention something from my learning about soils and how we are going to try to heal the earth and replant and all the rest of the things that need to be done for us to help our mother. That what they have found is that there are microbes that exist in individual colonies by the kind of life form and by the amount and proportions and them all working together. In effect, the microbes that live on the roots, I'm thinking, is like the microbiome in our gut, which was probably our first brain, even though we audaciously call it our second brain. And maybe plants' smartness and human smartness really go back to the microbes again.
Yeah. Well, fungus especially. Can I just take over a minute, Meg? I don't know how many of you know the writings and the work of Paul Stamets. That's S-T-A-M-E-T-Z. Paul Stamets is a mycologist. It means he studies fungus and molds. And he said that fungus, it was the world's first internet. And although it's a jokey expression, there's a lot of truth in it, in that fungal myceliae, those are the little threads that grow out. You know, when your bread, stale bread gets invaded by mold, all these sort of fibers run through the bread and they digest it and bring up food. What Stamets and other scientists of these days have found is that these mycelial threads spread everywhere through the soil. In fact, the biggest alive organism is in Oregon, and it's about 10 miles across. It's a fungus, a single fungus. But what they found was fascinating, which was that entirely altruistically, you know, for the good of the trees, they didn't need it, but the fungus would take some mineral substances from one side of the forest and transport it to the other side, you know, like say, magnesium or molybdenum or something that the trees were short of. The fungus would transport this stuff around. So it really is fascinating. So there's another name for you. I'll type it in the box there.
And Paul Stamets, if you look for him on the internet, you will find him at Fungi Perfecti. That's his company near Olympia, Washington. And yes, I'm very familiar with his work because he's nearby and he's on Facebook. You can follow him there too.
Fascinating guy. And one of his great experiments, he has this pile of absolute disgusting garbage they fished out of an oil spill. It was horrible, disgusting muck piled in a greasy heap, toxic as hell. It would kill anything. They threw some mushrooms in it. The mushrooms grew mycelium within 6 weeks. It was clean enough to put back into the soil and actually eat, basically. Anyway, Meg, if you don't mind, I just want to go back to the flower remedies, Batch's flower remedies as well. One thing you didn't say, and I should perhaps tell people, is these are homeopathic remedies, meaning they're ultra diluted. And I think of that as a way of kind of tuning out the noise. So, you know, you just get the plain signal. There's no question that homeopathy works and works well. There's lots of science. But all of his remedies were, you know, originally he was a homeopath. And the rescue remedy that Meg told us about, I've got to tell you, it's absolutely magic. I've seen it revive a bee colony that wasn't, you know, wasn't flourishing at all. I've seen it revive animals that were in a state of shock. It does wonders for kids who are upset and distressed, you know, dental visits, vaccinations, if the kiddie has to have they go into a state of shock, biological shock. Rescue remedies, absolutely brilliant for that. And every home should have some of this stuff in the cupboard. You just need a few drops in a tumbler of water and just sip it over a few hours. It'll transform you. But there's one warning. And I don't know if you've heard this, Meg, or you know it, but if you're not in a state of shock, don't take it, because it will put you into shock. it will actually, you know, it's all about vibrations and what perturbation is the correct technical word. If there's been a sudden perturbation, which is a state of shock, that's what it is, then it can rescue you, hence its name, but it can also cause a significant perturbation if you don't need it. So don't take it for the sake of it. In other words, don't take it every day just to be sure, you know, just so that I'm on top of things for today. Or it's going to be a lousy day, so I'll take some rescue remedy before it starts. No, you have to wait until it descends on you and then take it. Anyway, I see we're coming up to the hour. We're losing a few folks now. Everyone's kindly given an hour, which is great. And I think it's been one of the most fascinating hours, actually, in months or years. I think it's lovely. And I think people are really, really going to enjoy this recording, which I'll post as soon as possible, hopefully later today. And it's so full of stuff and facts. I think people are going to learn a great deal indeed. Thank you very much for your sharing, Meg, and Blaze, thank you for yours, and Raju, of course. I think it's all been totally fascinating and rewarding and well worthwhile. And don't forget, above all else, spiritual. There's some, you know, cosmical, spiritual meaning behind all of what we talk about on the Sunday meeting. So it's not religion, but it's definitely spirit. Okay. So thanks for coming, everybody. And don't forget, as I said in my note, not the correction note, but the first note, there won't be one next week. Viv and I are flying over to Europe. We expect to be a little bit, I've started using the term travel shocked, actually, because I found that being really dislocated can shock, and we do take rescue remedy. You can be shocked for quite a few days. I want to get over that and then be back on top. So it'll be 2 weeks today. Okay, and it will be on the Sunday. The Sunday meeting will always be on Sunday, no matter what Zoom says. And it's been great. Thanks a lot for coming. Take care, everybody. God bless.
Have a safe trip.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.